also perhaps well known to many of you. Stephen is the Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre and has been in that position since 2008. In addition to serving on the House of Commons Justice and Environment Committees, Stephen recently introduced Motion 312 in the House of Commons, asking that a special committee be struck to review the Canadian Criminal Code in regards to how Canada defines human beings. Please welcome again Stephen Woodworth.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I am really happy to be here with you this morning. Are you happy to be here today? I think so. And you have a good reason to be happy today, to be here. And let me tell you what that is. The reason that you ought to be happy to be here today is because history is on the side of justice and human rights. Never forget that. History is on your side. History is on our side. And so we should all take great comfort from that. And I want to thank the organizers for this event and also for inviting me, Life Canada and Campaign Life, and I always forget Jackie's name. Let's see. Alliance for Life, thank you very much. Because I know what a great deal of effort and time and blood, sweat, and tears goes into organizing an event like this, and so I'm very grateful to them and very privileged to be here. Est-ce qu'il y a des personnes du Québec ou des autres francophones ici? Aujourd'hui? Some, yes. So, bienvenue en Ontario et nous sommes heureux d'avoir votre tendance avec nous aujourd'hui. Now, I have to say I feel somewhat humbled here today because I'm among people who have put their heart and soul into the issues that we're here to discuss. And I have no particular special knowledge or advantage over any one of you. In fact, some of the things that I have to say you may or may not agree with, and that's quite all right. So I want you to know that I start out feeling very humbled by the collective wisdom in this room, and certainly appreciate the comments of the people who just spoke and the amount of historical and current context that they have given you. And I want to do something a little bit different because although we're here to talk about one motion at a time, actually, although I'm in Parliament, I happen to believe that the world does not stop and end inside the chamber of the House of Commons. And I happen to believe that the real important work that needs to be done is outside the chamber of the House of Commons. And I'm going to tell you why and speak about a number of things. But first of all, I want to say two things that I'm going to be speaking about that you may find shocking. And I hope you'll trust me with that. And I hope I can trust you to allow me to shock you. But in the course of my remarks, I want to tell you that magic actually really does exist. There is such a thing as casting a spell, and there is such a thing as enchantment. And before I'm through speaking, I hope I will help you to understand the truth of that. The second thing that may shock you that I'm going to talk about is that there actually are more important issues in Canada today than abortion. Now, I know who I'm speaking to, and I hope that that thought causes you to sit up and wonder what the heck is he talking about. But I hope before I am through speaking, you will understand what it is I mean. Now, before I get into those things, though, I do want to talk a little bit about what I regard to be the history of Canada and why we are on the right side of things here, and how it is that we have to adopt a method of communicating that to people. Along the way, we have to stop and think about why are we in this situation? What are the obstacles? Why are we not able to communicate to people the truths that we know and understand so obviously? And one reason, I think, is that we often fail to consider our audience. And a good speaker knows that that's actually the very first thing you have to do, is understand who is your audience. And you know what? I learned the hard way, 25 years in politics, that it really doesn't matter how right I am or how honest I am. If I don't develop a relationship with the people that I'm speaking to, they won't even listen to me. So how do we do that? Well, we have to begin to understand the language that our audience speaks. And those of you who are Christian have the greatest teacher in this respect, because that's how my Lord and Savior spoke. He didn't have the advantage of quoting the New Testament, at least. He did quote on occasion the Old Testament, because that's what people that he was speaking to understood. But he went even beyond that. And in the parables, he put his message into language that people understood. And I think often speakers forget to do that. And really, it's essential. The best speakers that you will ever hear are those who, when you have heard them, you will say to yourself, you know what? I knew that already. I just hadn't thought about it that way. Wisdom comes from within. If we can't convince people of the truth that's written in their own hearts, we won't get anywhere. So the challenge is, how do we access the truth that's written in the heart of every man and woman in Canada? And why haven't we yet? And I think one reason is that we haven't quite hit what I like to refer to as wise speech. What do I mean by that? I think wisdom requires three things. First of all, truth. When I was studying up how to present my motion in Parliament, I came across a great Oriental proverb, which is that the beginning of wisdom is to call all things by their right name. And what that's really getting at is truth. We have to be truthful. And not just surface truths, we have to dig down deep and understand what we really mean and what people really think. The second element of wisdom, in my humble opinion, is justice. We have to be fair. And that means we can't just ignore the arguments that are made against us. We have to meet them head on. We have to understand them and deal with them. And the third and most challenging aspect of wise speech is that we have to be sensitive. We have to be compassionate, or to put it in other words, we have to be loving. There are some truths which are just very hard, and they will not be received by everyone. If you don't understand where an individual is in relation to that truth, you may just turn them away. And I'm afraid that in some respects, in the pro-life movement, we've been guilty of that. So, in other words, how we say things is just as important as what we say. Now, if we're trying to understand our audience, and I better keep an eye on my watch here or I'll go on all morning, what is it that is written in the hearts of every Canadian? What truths do we have to access and make people realize that they already know for themselves? Well, if you consider the history of Canada, our nation was founded 400 or more years ago by two nations in conflict who came together and understood that they could resolve their differences peaceably. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. How do we do that? There are a couple of foundational principles. One is that we all start out equal. The principle of the equality of every human being is written in the DNA of Canadians, because you can't understand peace and justice without equality. You can't have peace and justice where some people are more equal than others, where the English are allowed to lord it over the French. That doesn't work. So the idea that every human being has an inherent and equal worth and dignity was really necessary for Canada to develop in the manner that it has. Another sound and foundational principle is that we have to have rule of law. Canadians understand that in a way perhaps that others don't. What do I mean by rule of law? What I mean is that no one is above the law. If we can have a law that says that no one over the age of 65 will be considered a human being because they're a burden to me or to you, that isn't rule of law. That's ruled by the whim of whoever doesn't like people over age 65. These are principles that Canadians understand, and so we have to articulate our concerns in those terms, in my opinion. Let me put it to you another way. What are we all doing here today? What do we really want? I mean, you can say we're all here because we'd like to see an end to abortion, but the inevitable question is, why is that? What difference does it make? So we have to dig a little deeper to find the truth that others can understand who don't see the word abortion the way that we do. And isn't it because we all want justice? We all want peace, and you can't have peace without justice. Now, I'm no theologian, but I could easily frame that in religious terms, but I won't, because the reality is that in Canada at large, not everyone shares my faith or your faith. Maybe not everyone in this room does, for all I know. But everyone does understand the power of the word justice. And they all understand the necessity for peace. And in Canada, we understand that every human being has an equal and inherent worth and dignity. And we all understand that no one ought to be above the law. These are the principles that are written in the hearts of every man and woman, and they are in our hearts, and we just have to get others to realize what they have within them. All of this is pretty obvious, I guess. I have to ask your forgiveness for that, because maybe I'm just stating the obvious, but I have to tell you, when I started out, it wasn't obvious to me. It took me 25 years to begin to get a glimmer of it. Now, why is it then that these principles of justice and human rights and rule of law have left us where we are today, where we actually have a law on our books that says that some human beings are not human beings? How in the world can we reconcile that with the Canadian traditions and heritage about which I've been speaking? And I've come to the conclusion it's because of magic. I didn't realize until I got to Parliament that mass hypnosis actually happens. It's the truth. And you know what? Certain words have a magical weight. Now, I don't mean that this necessarily has anything to do with the supernatural. I leave that to the theologians. But certainly it is a kind of psychological magic. I've learned that people don't necessarily take away from words the meaning that I take away from them. And one of the most magical words in Canada today is the word abortion. You holler abortion into the crowded theater of Canadian politics and just watch the politicians fleeing in all directions, trampling over those Canadian ideals that I've just been speaking about. The idea that every human being has an intrinsic worth and dignity. The idea that laws have to be honest. Even the idea that respectful dialogue is a necessity for Canadians, which again is a part of our DNA. They will trample over those ideals simply because they are so enchanted, enthralled, and preoccupied with the word abortion. I'll tell you something that I find kind of funny. My seatmate in Parliament, Terence Young, I grew a beard, some of you may or may not remember it, I shouldn't remind you. It was a white beard, and my seatmate in Parliament said, you know, you look like Gandalf, you know, standing on the bridge, holding off the Balrog, thou shalt not pass, you know. And that was kind of funny, but you know what? The reality is that I did have a magical incantation to use to fight the magic of the word abortion, and that is justice. Justice is a magical word too, and it carries a meaning for people, which in my opinion is actually even greater than the magic of the word abortion. Nonetheless, we have members of Parliament who are preoccupied with the word abortion, and I'm going to refer to my notes because I don't want to miss some of this. It really was quite amazing to me. You know, we had members of Parliament who were actually suggesting, in relation to Motion 312, that the Prime Minister should have a veto over the independence of backbench MPs. At a time when members of Parliament's roles are becoming more and more irrelevant, at least in some people's assessment, they wanted to say that the Prime Minister should be able to veto backbench private members' business. And why? Well, because they were enthralled by the word abortion. They just couldn't see the democratic tradition and the value of backbench independence that they were willing to sacrifice because of their preoccupation with abortion. Should we require every law to reflect reality? No, they said, our preoccupation with abortion leads us to close our eyes to 21st century medical evidence and advances in modern understanding. And anyway, it doesn't matter, since our concern for abortion requires us to pretend or even lie about whether a child is a human being, no matter what the evidence might say. Should we encourage national reconciliation on issues that matter to millions of Canadians by engaging in a respectful consensus-building dialogue? Goodness no, they said, our preoccupation with abortion means we must not give an ounce of compromise or tolerate an inch of dissent. Should we support a study about how best in Canada to honor the principle that human rights must be extended to every human being? No. Their preoccupation with abortion tells them that studying how best to recognize the equal and inherent worth and dignity of every human being would actually be the first step on a slippery slope. One member of Parliament said that. I'm going to tell you his name, Massimo Passetti. I couldn't believe it. It can only be because he was so enchanted, enthralled, and hypnotized with the word abortion that he really didn't understand what the motion was talking about. That is the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. Should we declare our legal definition, our 400-year-old definition of human being, to be frozen in time forever, immune from forever, from democratic review or from advances in modern science and understanding? Well, of course. Their preoccupation with abortion would lead them to do no less. So, magic. And how do we break through that spell and knock people off? Well, you know, the word justice. I had to smile to myself because the NDP justice critic, when she heard of my motion, said, well, you know, Mr. Woodworth is very clever. He's come up with a way here to get past us somehow. You know, what she really meant was, the motion is true. How can I figure out how to deal with the truth? How could she figure out how to deal with the truth? She understood the power of the word justice. She understood the power of the idea that every human being has worth and dignity based on who they are, not because a government or a parliament or anyone else gives it to them. So, preoccupation with abortion is a problem on the side of those who oppose the idea of universal human rights. But you know what? It's a bit of a problem on the side of those who support universal human rights too. What I want to ask people to do is to consider first things first. That's what I mean when I say that there are more important issues in Canada today than just the abortion question. Because if you cannot convince a member of Parliament that every human being deserves equality and that the worth and dignity of every human being needs to be enshrined in law, if you cannot convince a member of Parliament of that, how do you think you're ever going to convince him or her that something should be done about abortion? It isn't going to happen. If you cannot convince someone that a child is a human being at some point before his or her little toe pops out of the birth canal, how do you think you're going to convince that person that there's something wrong with abortion? You know, if as someone said, a child is just a blob of tissue or a collection of cells, well then, getting rid of that is no different than shaving a wart off your nose. Why not? If you can't convince someone that a child is a human being before the moment of birth, you're not going to convince them about abortion. So let's do first things first. Let's not ourselves become so preoccupied with abortion that we can't dig deeper and find the truth that motivates us underneath that. Why is it that we oppose abortion? It's because we believe that laws should honestly reflect reality. It's because we believe that our law must enshrine recognition of the inherent and equal worth and dignity of every human being. That's a good reminder that I'm just about out of time, so thank you. I could go on, but you get my drift. I want to second what Jim Hughes said earlier about the necessity for political action. I want to leave you with two recommendations, actually, but that's one of them, political action. I just want to nuance it a little bit differently than Jim did. And that is that, in my view, it isn't enough to simply take over riding associations. What you have to do in order to draw out from people these truths that we all hold dear is you have to get into relationship with them. That means you have to take up some of their concerns too. You have to work together with them. This is not just taking over riding associations. This is becoming good citizens and becoming politically active. You have to get informed about F-35s and about EI reform and about all the issues that are abroad in our land today. If you simply go in with your truth and you fail to recognize the truths that others are concerned about, you won't make that connection, you won't develop that relationship, and you won't be listened to. The second thing that I want to leave you with is the recommendation that you think long and hard about your communications. You stick to the message that's most likely to resonate in the hearts and minds of those with whom we're speaking. In my view, that is that we have to have laws that honestly reflect reality. We have to have laws which recognize the dignity and worth of every human being. So if you become politically active and you message on those points, there is no question in my mind that the sweep of history for 400 years is on our side, and that Parliament will eventually lose the argument. Those 207 members of Parliament who are stuck in the past, in living 400 years ago. I had a laugh at Minister O'Connor when he bravely leaped to the defense of our 400-year-old definition of human being by claiming that somehow I wanted to take us back to the Middle Ages by studying 21st century so we will eventually drag Parliament into the 21st century. History is on the side of justice and human rights. History is on your side. Thank you very much.